Hi, welcome to the Autistic Page. I'm David Page. I'm a pathological demand avoidant autistic and ADHD. I also have 2 PDA children that are now grown. Today I'm going to be giving you 12 tips on how to discipline your PDA child. And there's also a special bonus tip that is a real game changer. It just got real.
Oh, wow.
Today I'm going to be giving you 12 tips on how to discipline your PDA child. And there's also a special bonus tip that is a real game changer. Number 1, always be honest. Trust is such an important thing for PDA children. My son, when he was 14, I had to inform him that when he became an adult, he was not going to have legs and that he had to have 2 total knee replacements. That was not comfortable or fun, but the one thing is that he's told me about, he always appreciated the fact that I was completely honest no matter how bad it was. If you're not honest with your kid, they may end up resenting you and actually rebelling against you. Number 2, do not be afraid to let them fail. Failure is how we learn. When my kids succeeded in something, I was happy. Yes, they were great, they were successful, but they didn't learn anything. They already knew it. They want to learn, and because they're so independent, they have to learn to fail on their own. Number 3, always show empathy. My daughter is a PDA, or as my son is, and she used to just sit there and beat herself up. If she did something wrong, I would go in there and reassure her that she was not a horrible person. And I would say, this kind of thing happens, and you've learned from it, blah, blah, blah. And I tried to reassure her and let her know that I understood. Now, this is where my daughter really helped me out, and I could just be lazy because she beat herself up so much that there is nothing that I could possibly done that would have impacted her more than what she was doing to herself. So I was there to reassure her. Now, by beating herself up, what I mean is psychologically. She just felt like she was a horrible, terrible person. Number 4, treat them as equals or peers or a co-worker. If you treat them with respect as you would an adult, they're going to treat you with respect as an adult. This also really empowers them because you're not talking down to them. You're discussing something as an equal, as a peer. And that is extremely important because it does empower them. And that's exactly what we're concerned about, is the control. Number 5, understand that PDA'Rs do not recognize authorities like other people. And what it is we just see human beings. And it makes no sense because someone has been at a company for 5 years and so they get promoted. That doesn't mean that they're capable. It doesn't mean that they're smarter. It doesn't mean that they're better. It just means that they're holding a position of authority. So once again, that's why it's so important to approach your child as an equal. Now, don't get me wrong. PDA'Rs certainly recognize what authority is, and we also recognize the importance of it, but it doesn't make anybody any better than anybody. And yes, even your very young 6-year-old child will understand this. Number 6, simply discuss what happened with your child. When my son would screw up or get in trouble, he'd be in his room, and I'd go to his room, and I'd almost make a joke out of it and be like, well, that didn't work very well now, did it? And then we would just talk about it, about like what could work better or whatever, and I let him lead the conversation. I didn't do that. I would prompt maybe, but I wasn't there to punish him. I was there to guide him, well, not even guide him, assist him in understanding what his actions were and what the results of those actions were and how he could do it better. Now, when we're having this discussion, what's extremely important is Never say, well, you should have, or something like that. They know, and they're going to figure that out on their own. There's no sense in demeaning them or putting them down. They're going to do that themselves. So just make sure that you frame it in such a way that it's not accusatory. Never ever say you should have. Just what would have worked better? Number 7, ask yourself, is enforcing this really necessary? Am I doing this just because it's a social standard? Is it really absolutely necessary? I had a lady that is a PDA mom, and her son was walking in the mall or whatever it was, and he lost one shoe and just kept on going. And she thought about it and was like, you know what? He can walk with one shoe. It really isn't going to hurt anything. So she picked up the shoe, and eventually he asked for it and put it on himself. There was no meltdowns, no problems. She just let him work it out for himself. Often what we think is important is simply social norms, but those social norms aren't necessarily important. Number 8, never ever have them decide what their punishment is going to be. I understand that in the spirit of wanting to give them control, it sounds like a real good idea, but what you're doing is giving a seriously heavy demand. And a lot of times they're not going to know what your standard is and what you want, and so it's going to create even more anxiety, and they're actually more likely to lash out at you for having to decide their punishment. Number 9. Now this kind of goes along with showing empathy. As autistics, we show empathy by sharing stories. So go ahead and feel free to share a story with your child. The really important thing here is do not ever say, when I was your age, because already now you're setting yourself as this authority, as above them, and it's actually kind of feels demeaning. But you can say, yeah, when I was 9, I had a bike and I wrecked it and it was horrible. I love that bike so much, and just go on with it. This way you're showing your child that you actually understand, that you are empathizing with them. Number 10, remember that you are there to assist them to learn how to live as adults. You're there to empower them and help them, but you're not there to impose your will on them. If they want to do something, great, absolutely, support them. Make sure you understand the difference between what they consider a success and what you consider a success, because those are going to be very, very different. My kids were in 4-H, and they actually were very, very successful in 4-H and got grand champions and reserves all the time. In fact, they usually got more than anybody else. The thing is, I actually didn't care about that. And the reason they were so successful is I didn't push them. I helped them. I cared that they were there learning to take responsibility and learning to be adults. So I didn't have any expectation for them to win anything at all. Make sure you understand the difference between what they consider a success and what you consider a success, because those are going to be very, very different. Number 11, realize that whatever it is, whatever they did, they are probably way more upset than you are. We also go and drone over things that have happened, and we just can't let them go. There are things that happened to me in 5th grade that still really, truly bother me. Situations that you consider to be very minor might be damaging and might stay with them for weeks, months, years, or even a lifetime. So just try to keep that in mind. Number 12, don't be afraid to be a parent. I see so many PDA parents that they're so concerned about having a demand-free environment, then they get really, really concerned about, well, how do I discipline my child at all? Or, you know, do I just let this kid run around free and do whatever they want? No, of course not. There are times when it comes to harming other people, harming property, stealing, so forth, that you have to draw that line. And it will not be tolerated. And it's okay. In fact, it's good to do that. This is, again, where you choose your battles. My daughter And my son, I lived in a trailer for about 20 years. My kids grew up there, and by the time they left the place, there was probably about 20 holes where they had punched holes in the wall. It was mostly my daughter, and when she did that, I never did. I never said anything to her. I chose my battle. Yes, it was a bad thing and everything else, but I own the home, and I could replace it. And when she was that frustrated, there was no sense in just making it worse. And what they would do is punch the wall and go in their room, and that was enough for them, and they would settle down. But on other things, yes, I absolutely put my foot down and made damn sure that they knew this was not going to happen again. And we as PDA'Rs, we have to live life. We're going to be living life. We're going to be adults. And we do have to learn to deal with the things that we cannot change, or the things that we do not have any control over. So yes, having a demand-free environment is a good idea, but you also need to put your foot down when it's time to put your foot down, and do not in any way be afraid to. It's going to be a very good thing for them to learn. And now for the super bonus tip. My son, at a certain age, he did become very, very belligerent. And I had to actually start disciplining him, which was very difficult for me. I decided I would start putting him in timeout. But you gotta understand, I live in Colorado. He would go in timeout out on the porch, and usually this happened in the evening, so he'd be in his little Spider-Man underwears. So I say, all right, go sit on the chair outside. Or I'd take him there and put him there. And he knew what the deal was. So this is how it worked. Yes, he was in timeout, but he decided when he was done and when he wanted to go in. And I didn't care if it was 20 degrees outside. He was going to sit out there until he was ready to come in, and till he was ready to behave. And there were a lot of times the poor little kid was freezing his butt off. You know, I would stand by the door and just check on him every 2 minutes or so. And I don't know how many times I'd open the door, like, you ready? No. And I knew that eventually the cold would actually overcome his stubbornness, which I didn't know he was PDA at the time. But nonetheless, it still worked. Why? Because he had the power. He had the control. All he had to do was decide to adjust his behavior. And for him, it worked. Now, and I think the reason it did work is because I gave him the control. He was the one making the decisions. I just want to make clear, when I said that he decided to come in, the reason he was able to make that decision was because I gave him total control over the situation. Now, if I hadn't, I think no would have been no, and it just would have been a really bad situation. Actually, would have been abuse to put him out in the cold like that. Now, I hope this is helpful, and I don't want to sound like I'm a guru or anything like that. I'm certainly no psychologist, or I don't know anything about I'm not a child behavioralist, but I am PDA. And what happened, I think, was I just naturally was a real good father for my two PDA kids, because I didn't know any different. I just treated them like I wanted to be treated. And one thing I can tell you is this: I am very, very proud of how I handled myself as a father, because when my children became adults, they told me I was a damn good dad, and that made me very, very proud. But I really can't take credit for that, because I was just PDA and just floundering and just doing my best. Now, for the sake of other parents, please let me know in the comments little tips, tricks, things that actually worked for your children. This is David Page. Screw them, flop harder.